All right. All right. So we are actually live. We made it. So excited to be here, actually standing up for the first time ever on a live stream. I mean, in the actual office here at Master Coach University. So it's really great to have you here. And we're going to cover why strategy coaching is the killer app for your coaching clients today. And I should be able to keep my eye on the chat. So it does look like our chat is working for YouTube. I don't see anything coming in on Facebook yet. So it's possible Facebook, their chat system may not hook up for us today. So if that's the case, find a YouTube link somewhere and then you'll be able to get to me that way for sure. Let's go ahead and jump in though. So again, like I said, today we're going to cover why strategy coaching is the killer app for your coaching clients. And this is really a live stream that's included in is a part of the strategy immersion training inside of Master Coach University. So if you are in the strategy immersion training right now, you're in the right place. We are going to be doing these live streams weekly so that I can fill in the cracks with some additional tactics, some additional explanation, some strategy, if you will, to really support you in the process of mastering your strategy coaching as well. So today is kind of special because we're still in orientation week. If you're in strategy immersion training right now, and in orientation week, as I know you've been hearing, this is really nuts and bolts. We're really looking to just make sure that you are hooked up with your partners and you are ready to coach next week and all that. So I thought this was a perfect time to cover really why we're doing this in the first place. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an explanation in kind of a weird way. So give me a little bit of a rope to hang myself with here. Hey, Kenyatta, good to see you. I remember this was, I don't know, probably more than a decade ago now. And I was watching one of those old Star Trek movies, one of the original like 5 or 6 movies that came with kind of the original, Captain Kirk, etc. with Star Trek. And I remember there was this one movie where, the whole crew, they went back in time. Right. And they went back to like present day. I think at the time it was like the 90s or something like that. And they are, one of their crew is injured. I can't remember who. And the doctors of the day say, hey, he has a brain aneurysm and, because he had like a head injury, I think. And so we have to operate immediately. And so they're preparing to operate. And then Bones shows up. Anybody knows Star Trek lore? They know that Bones was like the doctor of the Starship Enterprise, right, in Star Trek. And so Bones notices what the doctors are doing. And, he does one of his classic Bones maneuvers. He freaks out and he says, what are you doing, man? We want to heal the artery, not chop him to bits. We want to heal the artery, not chop him to bits. And everybody, all the doctors look at him like he's nuts, right? And he says, all you need is this little thing. And he pulls out this little contraption, this little kind of piece of technology, right? Kind of futuristic looking, obviously, as you can imagine. And, he puts it on his crew's head. And, some little lights are sparkling and some sounds are going on. And then about 30 seconds later, he takes it off. And the crew member wakes up, and the crew member is like, "Yeah, everything's fine. I'm great now." And all the doctors are like, "Oh my gosh, how did you do that? How did you heal this person? I mean, he had a brain aneurysm or a stroke or it was some horrible head injury type of thing." And I don't know exactly what the dialogue was at that point, but really the idea there was the doctors of the day. The only way that they were possibly going to be able to save this individual's life is by taking a scalpel and like one of those, bone saws and chisel the skull open and operate directly on the brain, ultimately probably causing massive hemorrhages and brain damage and all sorts of problems. But that was the only way they could do it. That was how they attempted at the time, and really how we still do to this day, is my guess, try to cure that particular issue. But of course, Bones was from the future. He's from, I don't know, hundreds of years in the future. And so Bones knew this other way, had this piece of technology, and he knew how to fix that problem, how to heal the artery in the brain without chopping into the brain, without operating directly on the brain. And he had the technology to do it. So his how-to was much better than our current how-to, if you will. And so that was just, what was the difference there? I mean, obviously this is kind of a fictitious example, but it's one that, chances are some of us are familiar with. And there's a lot more kind of similar examples, analogous examples like that, right? But the difference between those two approaches, it was just strategy. That's all it was. One strategy was likely to kill this individual. The other strategy was guaranteed to fix the problem with almost no chance of death at the end of the day. There are actually modern day real examples, I'm sure. I mean, I'm not a doctor, not a medical researcher, but there are certain types of cancer, for instance. One of our partners and our ex-students, Hal Elrod, best-selling author of The Miracle Morning, he got a certain type of leukemia years ago. And, if you go back in time 50 years or 75 years, that same exact kind of leukemia was literally a death sentence. Like, you're just going to die. Maybe we can keep you alive for 6 months or something like that, but you can't make it with that. But Hal's still alive to this day. And in fact, as far as we can tell, he's cancer-free. So what was the difference there? It's just a strategy. That's it. We came up with a better way to produce the result, the goal that we had, than what we were doing before. That's what we would call an advancement. And so we're so used to these in our culture now. It used to be that the way I can communicate with you, however many people are going to actually see this, is that we got to get together face to face, right? We have to all drive somewhere and show up. Well, that was 20 years ago. Now, with a couple $100 and very little technology, or very little advancement in technology, nothing that's far ahead of what you can do, we can all be here together, and you could be anywhere in the world, right? So that's just a difference in strategy. Different technology, different strategy, different method, different approach, call it what you will. So let me ask you this, and this is really in a roundabout way, I'm answering this question, why strategy coaching is the killer app for your coaching clients. And really specifically, I'm talking about strategy here. So imagine if Bones from 200 years ago came back in time to help you. What if Bones came for you? Let's make a picture of this. I should have drawn these out ahead of time. But okay, so let's imagine your big goal. I guess that's about as far as, oh no. I'm sticking to the old paper. Speaking of strategy, I should have a better strategy for this. Flip charts are old technology, right? Oh, I see what the problem is. Okay, that should be better. All right, so let's say you have a goal, right? And your goal is money. You want to make as much money as humanly possible. Or maybe money's not a problem for you, and for you, you want to find love, or you want to find a member of the opposite or the same sex, whatever it is for you. You're a little lonely, you want to find that great relationship, or the kind of situation you want relationship wise. Or let's say, like we were talking about Hal just a second ago, let's say you have, I don't even know how to draw this, but you have a medical issue, maybe a different heart, right? The question mark in it, or you just want to have like the perfect body, right? You want to get the perfect muscles, and that's kind of an arm. Forget it. Anyway, you get the idea. That could be all sorts of things. So just let's forget about it. But you got the idea. Let's actually just write health here. All right. So in one or many of these areas is usually where your clients are going to have goals. You have a desire in at least one of these, is my guess, or something that's not quite where perfect would be for you. I know I do. And so somebody from the future, let's just say, Bones from Star Trek is, yeah, I'm left-handed. That's true. I think that's right though for this setup, right? I don't know. Anyway, so Bones comes back in time, and he knows the future. He knows so much more strategies and how to produce results way beyond what you'll chances are ever know from your time. So he can come back and he can tell you the secrets in the next 100 years to making a lot of money, and exactly how to position yourself, and what you need to do. He knows the how-to. He knows the strategies for these, and he tells you. He explains it to you in detail, step by step. Or let's say, he comes back and he understands, like in 2200 or whatever year that was, Star Trek land, everybody's kind of worked out their relationships at a much higher level. It's utopia now. And so they really understand this at a higher level than most people in our society current day appreciate. Okay. So he can tell you, look, this is what you need to do differently. This is the secret to finding who you want and being with your perfect relationship. So he gives you the strategies for that. Or let's say, again, like you've got a disease, you have longevity issues or fitness or energy issues, and he's a doctor, so he could perfectly do that, right? He can handle all of that. What if he did that for you? Like, what kind of difference do you think that would make? I mean, how much of your life would be different? I mean, if you just handled one of these areas, you just handled relationships. I mean, that's a whole different life. By the way, not only that, but if you had better relationships, do you think that would have an impact on these other areas too? You think you'd probably be motivated to be healthier and live longer? If you had a great relationship, you guys would probably be fit together, right? Probably be on the same team money-wise. Now, again, that's just one example, but these all impact each other also. So just one strategy for one of these areas could change all of them eventually. What was the difference? Like, what was the difference between when Bones walked into your life and when he walked out with you knowing how you're going to actually get all this to happen? Now, obviously, you got to follow through, right? There's only one difference. The difference is strategy. He gave you a new strategy. He gave you a different strategy. That's it. Always be searching for more efficient and effective, less destructive, invasive ways to do things. Yeah, sure. The key there is ways, how to, the strategy. That's all we're talking about here. And so as a strategy coach, like that's your job. Your job is to not just know some strategies, like that's good, but actually be able to work with your client so that they learn the strategy, they use the strategy, and it actually works out for them. That's actually a much more complicated set of problems than just Bones coming back in time and telling you some secrets, of course. So I'm going to answer the question very simply here. What is this? What is strategy? I mean, we're talking about like why this would make a difference, but what this really is, all strategy is, and the coaching of strategy as well, is whatever it is that answers the question, how? How am I going to have the finances and the career and the business that I want? How am I going to have the relationship and the love and the experience with people around me that I want? How am I going to have the experience of my own physical energy, the way I look, my body, my longevity, and how long I'm on this earth? How well is that going to go? How do I actually produce those results? That's it. That's what strategy is. Just answers that question, how. Now, there are two types of strategies that we use as strategy coaches, and you're going to learn both of these. I guess this is just going to keep happening. I suppose I'm supposed to take those off when I'm done with them. We'll just use what's left. There's still plenty of room for us here. So there's two types of strategies that you will learn in strategy immersion training and that you'll be utilizing. Just taking a look at the chat here. Strategy is the means of finding out how to just as you, yeah, okay, right, yeah, totally. Exactly what I said. So two types of strategies that we'll be using here. And we talked about this week already. So the first type, external. So we've got external strategies. Now, external strategies could include things like just external steps, right? These are like steps on the outside, right? So they're external steps. For instance, I am learning certain investment strategies right now. And so as I learn these strategies, these investors tell me the very specific steps I need to take. They say, you want to do a stock screen for these particular types of equities, and then you need to run these numbers and do these calculations, and you need to look at these graphs. There's step by step what I'm supposed to do in order to successfully complete that particular investment strategy, right? I have friends and coaches that teach specific investment strategies, and they cover external steps that they need to take. Next, there could be tools, right? Like we just talked about that, like using a particular screening tool or a particular website or particular external tool, like a mechanic. Like I have a tool that I just put together specifically because I'm doing these live streams of a new microphone that's connected to an old system of mine to get hopefully better sound quality. I'm not sure how I did because I'm not listening to my own feedback right now, but you get the idea. I've got a tool that actually produces a strategic result here. Also, think of this as almost like another tool, like a network. So a network of different people around you, the peer group that you have around you. So that is an external strategy, you know, because other people are outside of me. So if I gather around me very specific people, like I have actually a client that is working on investments right now. He's moving much more solely into real estate investing, very successful already, but wants to up his game. And I have a mastermind. That's in my mastermind. There's a couple of real estate investors that do over $1 million a year in their investments. And so I told him, you know, that guy needs to be a part of your network. So you can make better investments if you have the right network of people around you. And my network is available to my clients. So they're going to hook up. And by the way, when he meets somebody in my network, that individual is a part of other networks that have helped him to produce better results using better strategies as a real estate investor. So that network is not only an external strategy, like just have that available to you, but that network also can point to other tools and other steps, etc., as well. So all these kind of like play off of each other in a big way. External works with what we might call circumstances. Right? Your circumstances are part of your external strategy. Now, some circumstances, and the way a lot of people look at circumstances is, you know, what's happening to me. You know, like this is the way my family is. This is the way that life is. This is the way the government is. This is the way money is. Right? It's just all the stuff, like kind of like the victimization side of circumstances. What I'm talking about here is actually making changes to circumstances. couple years ago, I was working with a couple clients that were in circumstances, specific relationship and family circumstances that were really crushing to them. I mean, they were, losing like the will to live, and their relationship circumstances in their particular marriages, they just kind of couldn't go on because they felt a lack of passion, or they felt a lack of being understood, or they felt a lack of attention, they felt a lack of respect, and all sorts of different circumstances that were around them. Now, it impacted them very deeply, way beyond external, right? But at some point, it was like, look, you're in the wrong circumstances. I mean, we've done everything we can to change you and make you as great as you possibly can. And you stay in this particular relationship, in this particular circumstance, with these particular people around you, and you're just never going to be happy with that. You're never going to be fulfilled. You'll never actually be the fullest expression of who you really could be, at least in a marriage or a relationship. That's just basically, it's not impossible, but it's highly unlikely at this point. And so when they got clear about that, they changed their circumstances. And that is an external change in strategy. These are just other words that might make you think about pretty much external strategy work. Tactics. Any change in tactics would generally be an external strategy. Usually, most of the time when we talk about tactical execution, when we talk about methods, most methods are going to be external. And again, these could also be applied to the other side, and we'll talk about that in a second. But at the end of the day, all of this are under kind of in the general area of mechanics. This is all mechanics, right? The steps, the tools, the network, the circumstances, the tactics and methods. It's all mechanical stuff, external mechanics. And as a strategy coach, if you're working with anybody on any of these things, I mean, that is in your area. That is, now, by the way, again, in the dogma of coaching, many coaches will say, well, you can't teach any of this stuff. You can't tell anybody anything because, that wouldn't be being a coach. But under the umbrella of actually making a difference for people, actually adding value, maybe that doesn't meet perfectly with ICF's core competencies and the way they look at coaching. And yes, I agree that just teaching people a bunch of stuff is not really the ultimate expression of coaching, right? It's not the most powerful thing you can provide as a coach, is just teaching somebody a tool, right? But if they don't know the tool, then it'd be awfully valuable for them to actually know what the tool is, right? So give them this information. I mean, that adds tons of value to your client. Now, by the way, as a coach, you can also utilize coaching approaches to support your client in understanding what steps, tools, network, circumstances, tactics, methods, etc., that they already know, they're already aware of, and yet they haven't executed yet. And maybe organize those into a strategy so that they can implement those things. Or potentially, maybe they have some ideas about where they can find these things out. Like, where do I learn the steps? Where do I get, change my circumstances? What might be a better circumstance? What might be different tactics or methods that I might use? Like, where can I find the answers to these? And then just coach them to go get them, right? So whether you tell them this information or you like Socratically ask them what it is that they're going to do so that they can actually get there, it's like, I'm not saying 6 1 half dozen the other. There is a difference in the impact on your client. There's no doubt. But either way, it's going to impact their external strategy. It's going to impact their mechanics at some point. Now, the coaching philosophy will say, look, if they come up with this stuff themselves and you just kind of are there to facilitate them discovering, exploring, organizing, prioritizing, and implementing these things, then they're going to be way more like motivated and on board with, executing this stuff, and they won't forget it because it's like their discovery, right? And so I'm totally on board with that if that's the approach that you take. But it needs to be understood that regardless of whether you take that approach, kind of like what generally would be expected to be like the perfect approach, like, let's make sure they know this stuff, right? Let's make sure this stuff actually gets executed and implemented. Let's make sure that these are strategies that they're going to take on for whatever outcome they might have. Does that make sense? So that's the first area. This is like strategic area number 1, external. I'm just going to check out this chat, see what we've got here. Someone actually stated on Facebook, 99% of life coaching certification is BS. And of course, I had to retort. Fair enough. All right. So that's not really the subject of our live stream tonight. So it's possible that that individual might have a very particular strategy that has them say that, though. Let's put it that way. But I can't speak for 99% of the training and certifications out there. I can only speak for ours. All right. So then anyway, this is the first area. And, when you look at like coaches that are working most of the time, coaches that are known in our society as people that are like teaching information about how to do something and what to do, usually they're over in this external area. However, and as you guys who are in strategy immersion training, you already know this, there's this second area of strategy coaching or strategic coaching. And we'll just call that, for simplicity, internal strategy. Now, why might internal strategy be important to be able to deliver as a coach? Even if you're like a money coach or a health coach. Well, it's really simple. The reason is that no matter how much somebody knows about these external strategies, if their internal strategy doesn't allow them to execute this stuff, if their internal strategy has them execute this stuff, let's say, in a less than effective way, right? They're not following through on the steps powerfully enough. They're not using the tools in a way that works, right? They understand the method. Like anybody can read a book about playing piano, but then sit down at a piano and try to play. Anybody can watch, thousands of hours of basketball and then get on the court and see how they perform, right? So just knowing this stuff, I mean, I'm not saying it makes no difference, but it makes next to no difference if your client's internal strategy is not set up for them to actually plug into these things, follow through on them, and orchestrate and organize them and implement them in a way that actually produces the results. Because the reason for all this stuff is not just like, hey, it's nice to know a bunch of steps. Like, who wants to know a bunch of steps? Right? This doesn't matter at all if it's not for the goal, right? Like all these things, the whole idea is they point to, is this sticky? I don't know if it is or not. They all point to a goal. It's the only reason why you're doing any of this. If you don't have a goal, then there's no need for this stuff. You don't need a coach to help you with this. Just go on with the life the way that you always have. If your life is perfect and everything's fine, you have no goals. That's great. Really, I mean that if that's the case for your client, but chances are a client comes to you because they have a goal or they have something they're at least trying to get away from, eliminate, change, or escape from. And there's a strategy for that. Guaranteed there's a strategy for almost any of those things. That doesn't mean it's guaranteed that you can just wave a magic wand and cause that to happen. But that's what these things are for. So ultimately, think about it this way. The gap between knowing everything and all the mechanics and actually achieving your goal, assuming you already know it, if the shoe fits, is just your internal strategy. That's it. It's just your internal strategy. So, what might internal strategy coaching include? Well, the obvious stuff that a lot of coaches are aware of would be things like mindset. You might call this emotion. Mindset or emotion coaching. Working with somebody on thought. Just another way of saying emotion or mindset. Like if I know all the steps to make my $1 million, but my thoughts are constantly like, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. I can never do that. I'll never achieve anything. Right? You think I'm going to execute towards my goal? I mean, probably not. Right? Sometimes there's coaches that work with somebody on their spirituality. So like spiritual work. If somebody's spirits are really low, their spirits are down, then it's highly unlikely that they'll be very effective with strategies to get them to a really extraordinary goal. Like if it's just a basic goal, like just get a job or talk to the opposite sex or, like go out and take a walk. Like, no, yes, they don't have to have perfect spirituality then, right? But if somebody's in low spirits and then they want to make $1 million or they want to find the relationship of their dreams or, they want to cure their cancer or they want to lose 100 pounds, that's not happening. Chances are they're going to have much better spirits to move themselves to action, to get them to organize this, even believe it's possible. Now, by the way, somebody might tell you, your client might tell you, you know what, the reason my spirits are so low is because of all this external circumstance crap. Like it's the fault, like change the circumstance and my spirits will be a lot better. And by the way, I don't want to disagree with that completely because yes, maybe if they just instantly lost 100 pounds, they probably feel a little better for a while. But where their spirits are and where their thoughts are and where their mindsets are, where their emotions are, probably also drew them towards strategies that took them in a direction that's probably less than what they wanted or the opposite of what they wanted. Do you think that's possible? I mean, is it actually possible to want one thing, but do something that actually gives you the opposite or takes you even farther away from the thing that you really want? Think that's possible? Do you think that people, even though they are doing a strategy that's contrary to what they really desire, what they really want, or what they really want to change, do you think it's possible that they might even keep doing that strategy over and over and over again? Happens every day. I don't have one single client where that kind of thing doesn't actually happen to them at some point in their life, in some area of their life. Happens all the time. Now, sometimes it happens because they have no clue that the strategy was never going to get them what they want. Maybe they actually thought it was going to help them. Like there, a lot of people will think like, well, if I just beat myself up enough, if I just hate on myself enough, I'll lose the 100 pounds. I'll just white knuckle it. I mean, logically, that actually kind of makes sense. I mean, if it's painful enough, maybe you'll change, right? Now, on the same note, some people actually know the strategy that they're using is totally contrary to what they're actually wanting to see happen, and yet they keep doing it. Now, I'm not going to get into why people do that, but plenty of people do that. In fact, you and I have done that many times in our lives. You could probably even think of some. Have you ever had a time where you knew better, but you did it anyway? Like you knew you shouldn't eat the tub of ice cream, but you did it. Or you knew you shouldn't have like really just raged on your significant other or your best friend and told them off, but you did it anyway. Or when you really should have saved that $1,000 rather than like giving it to your friend and just hoping that maybe they'd give it back to you, but you did it anyway. Happens all the time. And we knew better. We literally knew that was a bad strategy. Why we would do a strategy, an external strategy that is totally contrary to what we really want to see happen, it's all over here. It's all over here in the internal is why that's going on. It's what you can't even see that is controlling it all. Think of it as a little metaphor for you. If you plant a tree and the tree grows, what most coaches are working on would be like pruning the branches, getting the fruit off the tree, making sure the tree looks good. But what's invisible to the naked eye with that tree is what's controlling the health and the prosperity of that tree. It's the roots that are underneath the surface that are controlling it all. And that's, in our world as strategy coaches, is the internal strategy that's going on in your client and the internal strategies that you can work with your client to actually make use of so they actually transform and something happens for them. So spiritual would be in that realm. All this stuff, as I just mentioned, it was in my notes even before, kind of jumped the gun on this one, but it's invisible. It's what you can't see that's controlling it all. This would also be in the realm of concept. Sometimes it's just good to have the concept. I know for me, like I will take trainings where I learn external strategy after external strategy after external strategy, on and on and on for hundreds of hours before I do anything with it. Because if I don't get it, if I don't get the concept internally, if I can't like feel it and connect the dots where it's like, oh yeah, it all makes sense. It's just like this. I'll never be able to execute any of it because I can't get it. Now, some people are just really great at external strategies. They just execute like crazy. They don't even need to understand it. So more power to them, but that is not me. I need the concept. Give me the concept, and then I could master almost anything. Another way of saying this would be like ideas. There was a session I had with my coach about a month or two ago, and we got to the root of one of my big psychological issues, which is like I like to look smart. Like it's like almost like my competitive advantage is like if everybody knows I'm smart, right? You know, if that's the way I come off, you know, I'm not just talking about professional circles. I'm talking about like it's like a meta strategy for me now, right? That like I feel like I'm gonna win. Like that's the way I get by in life. That's the way I survive and succeed, is like he's really smart. And so we realized like that strategy, that internal strategy, the idea of I'm smart, the way it manifests over here in the external world is I have to do everything 4 times as detailed and 4 times as perfect, and I have to like overthink everything. And so when I'm executing on things, the simple steps and the tactics and methods, like it takes 4 times as long to actually produce the result than it does for anybody else that I'm competing with, anybody else that's committed to the same result. And so what happens is this whole concept, which has actually benefited me to some extent in my life, or I wouldn't have taken it on, this idea of I'm really smart and everybody needs, like it's written down here, I want you to think I'm smart. I literally have it written on my wall because I wanted to remember that psychology that I had. I want you to think I'm smart. And it's like, well, gosh, you know, if I do some steps and I do it really quickly and it doesn't come off like really, really intelligently, somebody might not think I'm smart. You know, then I might die, right? So, because that's like my key to life, my key to success, right? Or one of the keys. And so my coach is like, what are you going to do about this? Like this internal strategy is really destructive for you actually executing on the mechanics of what you need to actually succeed and make it to the next level with your business, with your life, with your time, with your family, etc. And I said, you know, maybe the idea is I have to exchange this idea of having to be smart with that the priority is richness and abundance. And we came up with this like really simple phrase. It's like, why bother being smart when you could be rich? Like, well, I don't need to be smart if I'm rich. I could have a bunch of smart people working for me, right? If I have abundance, like that's way, 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 way more important than being smart. I mean, in a variety of different circumstances. I mean, in business, it's an easy one. Obviously, there's a lot of smart people in business too, but you got to have priorities. So when I started thinking this way, and by the way, is that true? Is it true that you should be rich, not smart? Of course not. It's not true. It's just prioritizing the abundance and propagating and maximizing our strategies in my business way more important than me coming off like a smart person at this point. Like I'm just beyond that point in my business. So it's not like the correct idea or the right concept or true and the other one's false. It's just if I change that concept, all of a sudden I can execute over here in a quarter of the time. I can get way more done in less time. And all of a sudden I'm competing with way, way, way more successful businesses. Why were they more successful? It's not because they're smarter. It's because they did things in a reasonable period of time more efficiently than I generally will do them, because I'm sitting here over here trying to be smart. So the point of the matter is, these internal concepts and ideas, something as simple as that, like I want you to think I'm smart versus it's better to be rich than smart, or why be, I think it's why be smart when you could be rich, I think was the phrase that we came up with, final concept or idea. Like that has a massive impact on external strategy and whether or not I achieve certain goals as well. So another way of looking at this might be, and this is very common vernacular in coaching, beliefs. In fact, that statement that we just talked about is also, those are values. Values, right? Because we were making a priority. One thing is more important than number 2 or number 3. It's just a new set of values for me to actually work with. And that could change, everything. Could change how I operate, not just how I think and feel. So beliefs and values, these are over here in the internal world. Also, just any way of representing the world. We call this VAC in NLP terms. Visual areas, like visualizing different things inside, right? It doesn't have to be outside of you. You could see it inside your mind's eye, and that's a visual representation. Auditory, how we talk to ourselves, right? They call it self-talk. And then finally, K in the VAC stands for kinesthetic. Just another way of saying feelings, right? Like how I actually feel inside of myself. We can create feelings inside ourselves in a variety of different ways by using external kinesthetics, like actually moving our body in a particular way, or focusing differently inside our bodies as well. So these different elements, how we visualize, how we represent things auditorily or in our own self-talk, and then how we actually feel and use our kinesthetics, use our physiology, have a massive impact on like everything else I've just written on this entire board, right? So the point of the matter is very simple. It's that these internal areas have an impact. The final one I'll write down here is this even on our screen? Yeah, it is. Okay, you guys can still see this, I hope. Motivations, right? If your motivation for, let's say, getting into a relationship is to take advantage of somebody physically, or let's say to, I just talked to a client of mine the other day, and their motivation for a relationship was novelty. It's like, I'm bored. I want some excitement. I want some newness in my life. Like they could have just watched a movie or like surf the internet, but they go find a person to create that novelty for them. It's like, if that's your motivation in a relationship, like there's no question why those relationships aren't lasting very long. As soon as the novelty wears off, you're done. Or as soon as you've gotten what you want physically from somebody, you probably aren't going to be interested anymore. Or if you are, eventually they're going to feel undervalued. They're going to feel like you don't really care about them. You just want them for one thing, let's say. So all these elements, mindset, emotion, thought, spiritual or spirituality, all these things that are invisible, concepts, ideas, beliefs, values, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic representations and motivations, all these areas are underneath this realm of internal, what I would call, I know I'm going to misspell this, psychology. This is a psychological strategy area. So you have mechanical strategy or external strategy, and then you have psychological strategy and internal strategy. And both are at play in every area of your life. Every area. It's just a question of how do these like interact? How are they playing off of each other? Like I take these steps and then I feel depressed, and then I visualize failure and then I change my circumstances and go drinking, right? So we go back and forth between these different, we bounce around like a pinball. But unfortunately for most coaches, they've learned external strategies and they've learned how to facilitate external strategy, but they haven't really learned internal. They've just kind of glossed over this area because this is hard because you can't see it. You got to ask a lot of questions. By the way, your client's usually not that excited about this area either because it seems esoteric for them. Like most clients that you'll meet aren't going to just automatically jump in and work with you for 10 hours on their values, right? So you need ways that you can quickly have this impact them externally and internally as well, so they can actually see what will make a difference for them. And by the way, as we go through strategy immersion training, you're going to be very quickly learning these elements of how to utilize internal strategy changes quickly so that your client actually gets the impact today, not just like someday when they follow through on 100 steps. So those are the two different types of strategy that we as strategy coaches need to be masters of, and what we need to be able to intervene on as well. So I'll give you a couple examples. I'm not going to write these down. Actually, yeah, I'm not going to write these down right now, but I'm going to check the chat and I'm going to give you a couple examples of this so you get a deeper idea of what I'm talking about here. So let's see. We had somebody asking about legal requirements. It's interesting how we get all sorts of different questions when we go live. Let's see here. Touch on legal requirements such as registration with a governing body, even considered trying to inquire about student funding. So legal requirements. So in the States, there aren't any legal requirements other than just don't try to be like a doctor. Don't claim to be somebody you're not. We've seen some coaches like trying to act as therapists, and that's where you get in trouble there. So you just need to make sure you're disclosing on who you are and who you're not. Now, in Europe and elsewhere, there are other legal requirements. Not a lawyer, so I'm not going to go that deep into that. But most of the time, coaches can actually start practicing very quickly. So there's not much barriers there compared to most other like people helping and facilitation professions. Yeah, Ireland, I can't tell you what you might be facing in Ireland, but definitely I think you can Google it. LinkedIn says without ICF accreditation, can't work legally in Ireland. That's very possible. I know in Europe it's a lot more stringent. So, if you want to get your ICF credential, talk to us, because this month, September, we're actually going to be onboarding for our ICF credentialing program called the Core Competency Certification Program. So that's something you can get handled. Look, it is some hoops to jump through. It's not really my cup of tea to deal with bureaucracy, but the nice thing is you can get all the training handled very quickly with us. And then it's just a matter of a few other steps through ICF, and then you got it. You're ready to roll. So I won't go any deeper into that today just because we're covering different subject matter. I'm personally accredited as NLP practitioner. Yeah, so I mean, if you're already accredited as that, just, you don't have to call yourself a coach. You could just practice in those areas potentially, as long as, again, there's no legal requirements for those particular areas in your particular locality. So, every location is a little different. Every governance is different. You just gotta deal with that on a case by case and a local basis. But I haven't found any barriers here in the States, like really any. And that's one of the great things about our industry is like you can really do a lot without necessarily having to take a bunch of exams and go through tons and tons and years of legal hoops in order to just be able to like do what you already are called to do. Now, some of the downside of that is most coaches I've found, even trained and certified coaches even, are not very facile with these areas. They're not effective at working with their clients on strategy, like extremely ineffective, or at least inefficient. I think somebody mentioned efficiency. Yeah, Kenyatta mentioned efficiency in the chat. So like, just because you can do it doesn't mean you necessarily should without getting your skill set up. And that's literally what we're talking about right now. That's why we're here together. So Patriot Views, just get in touch, and I can lead you to the right places to get that rolling for yourself. Okay, so a couple examples here. First one, this is a client of mine that I've been working with for years now, and in the past, he had a very specific internal strategy, and his internal strategy was thinking about what he wanted for himself. Go do everything it took to actually produce the result, get the result, and then keep everything that he could for himself. That was basically his approach. So now this is a very specific internal and actually kind of an external strategy as well. This is what you might call an egocentric strategy. In fact, I will write this down. So think of it this way. And by the way, this individual was very successful. He was making millions of dollars in his particular profession, which is an area of the arts. He was at the absolute top of the top, best of the best in his particular area. Like got awards beyond, like if you heard of the kind of awards this individual had gotten, you would know what I was talking about, right? So, but the way he was getting those results was coming predominantly, like not completely his entire life, but a big part of his life was coming from what somebody might call ego, what I would call an egocentric, coming from an egocentric place, right? By the way, this mentality, this internal strategy can work in some parts of your life. Like if you're 6 years old and you're hungry, yelling and screaming until you get some food actually works. Like, cause your parents will be like, oh, we better feed her, right? And by the way, you won't even get punished for that. Chances are, you'll get rewarded for that egocentrism. So there are times in our lives when we have to be egocentric in order to survive, in order to really live our lives, and sometimes even in order to thrive, for that matter. However, this individual recently came to me and said, I have a certain type of cancer. It's not life and death necessarily, but I'm starting to really get worried about my mortality. And he literally said to me during a session, I'm scared to die. I'm stressed out of my mind. And I thought about what I knew about this client and realized, gosh, coming from this egocentric mentality, coming from this internal strategy, this way of looking at the world, it's all about me, 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 which we've all done at times in our lives, right? But thinking about this at that point, when you might lose yourself by basically losing everything that you can experience in life, because when you're dead, you don't have anything. Basically, you lose it all. That's got to be the worst thing for somebody that's coming from an egocentric way of thinking, or egocentric psychology. So for him, I had to work with him on at least gravitating to like a different strategy. I like think of it as gravitating to another level. And this next level, you might think it's this uber spiritual, like everything's about the world and whatnot, but actually it's not the perfect mentality at all. It's more of a ethnocentric. An ethnocentric psychology. So in this case, and it didn't take much for me to work with him on this, I asked him, what's more important than your life? And he said, well, making sure my son is taken care of, making sure that he's okay. He's got all sorts of challenges. He's on the spectrum. He's dealing with relationship issues right now and schooling issues and trying to figure out what he's going to do for his career. And he's kind of claustrophobic, doesn't really interact with people very well. And you know what? Like, this is way more important than just me and all my dreams and all my selfish wants and desires. He's way more important. And so I asked him, well, so, knowing that you're not going to be here forever, how can you actually achieve this more ethnocentric goal of the people that you're close to, the people that you care about, taking care of them and making sure that they're going to be all right? And he said, well, I've got to do all these things for him and I got to set him up right. I've got to teach him these things and we're struggling and it's taking all this time. And, I may not even have enough time on this earth to give him these things. And I said, why is that? And he said, because, he's kind of dependent on me. He's learned over the years that I'll do everything for him because this guy, even though he was fairly egocentric, he was also a doer. This individual, like, he's not a shrinking violet. He's not a wallflower. He gets stuff done, right? And so what ends up happening for a lot of individuals like this, type A's, high D's, that they end up doing everything that the other people around them that aren't maybe so proactive should be doing for themselves. And so we ended up talking about, like, what is it that you need to leave him, no matter how long you're going to be here, such that when he understands and realizes and appreciates those things, that he won't need you. Like, he could still depend on you as long as you're around, but that when you're gone, he'll be able to fend for himself and take care of himself and take on what he needs. And he said a couple different things. I don't remember exactly what they are. That's not the point. But he said, he needs to understand that he needs to follow through on this, and he can believe in himself, and that he could do whatever he wants as long as he takes action on it. Like, just these kind of like basic principles that obviously this individual wasn't living yet. And I asked him, are you already teaching him these things? And he said, yeah, I tell him all the time. I said, well, then possibly the only reason why he's not doing them is because it's not a necessity. He doesn't have to. If he doesn't have to do it because you're doing everything for him, then you may never see him take these things on that you want for him, but you can also trust that when you're not there anymore, he'll have to do it because you'll have already given him the gifts that he needed. And when you depart, in a way, that's going to be his time to shine. That's going to be his moment when he can learn to truly depend on himself, because, he's going to absolutely have to. And you could still push him out of the nest a little bit to do that. But ultimately, if you lost your life in a weird way, that actually might be an opportunity for your son. And he laughed at that point, and I could just hear him on the other end of the phone smiling, realizing that when he's really thinking beyond himself, when he's thinking not just about what he's going to have to do for his son, it's all about him doing it all, right? That egocentric connection with what he did for him, like, he could actually let go and see how, being that he's not going to be here forever, even if he's here for another 10 years or 10 months for that matter, however long he's here, that thinking from a more ethnocentric perspective, something that's not so egocentric, gravitating to that different internal strategy, that different psychology, actually set him free in that session. Literally, during one session, no more fear of death. That's just one psychological shift, right? And there are times when we absolutely have to go from egocentric to ethnocentric in order to survive or in order to succeed. There's some point, like at school or in college or at our job, where we just realize, if we're not taking care of everybody else around us also, we're going to lose somehow. We're not going to get our needs met either. Now, there ideally is a point where people gravitate beyond that, where they're not just taking care of their tribe. Like, in the US now, we've become very tribal. And so if somebody doesn't agree politically, somebody doesn't think the same way, they're not from the same part of the world, then it's all of a sudden they're the enemy, basically. And we start treating each other that way. We're very ethnocentric right now. But if we're ever going to get around that, and many people have already done that, we got to get to the point where we're maybe more world, or maybe even call it spirit-centric. And gravitating to this psychology frees you up from the limitations of the one that's lower of it, the one that's lower down. Somebody who's world and spirit-centric, they get together with somebody that doesn't think the way they do, they're not going to be at war all of a sudden, right? Because they'll be open to appreciating there's different points of view, and that they can appreciate that there's all sorts of different ways of living and being and operating in the world, and that their way is not the right way, although we all kind of tend to think that way. But if you're world-centric, you can get beyond that at least. You at least have that flexibility. So does it make sense that when you operate in any one of these centers of gravity, again, nobody operates just ethnocentric or just egocentric, right? Unless, like a toddler might be purely egocentric, let's say. But the point being, when you operate as one of these specifically as your center of gravity, it will create possibilities, and it'll also create limitations as well. You need to be able to bounce around between these different psychologies. And just imagine if you just thought from this perspective and you got together with a client, and then you start asking questions like, what mentality are they coming from in the area where they're having a problem, or in the area where they're not where they really want to be, right? you might find that there might be a change they need to make here. And this could be literally the conversation you facilitate. I'll give you another framework here. This is actually analogous to the conversation I just shared, where, the growth of my organization, let's call it just money-wise, financially, is dependent on my psychology gravitating to the next level. And so for many, many years, I was in this kind of frame of mind where it was all about surviving. A lot of entrepreneurs get in this mindset from time to time. It's just like, you know what, if I could just make it to next year, like that'd be amazing, right? If I could just survive in my business for 5 years, like, hey, that's better than 80% of businesses, right? So survival is a mentality. And by the way, are there times when we need to have survival as a mentality? Sure. There's all sorts of circumstances, especially in a startup mode as an entrepreneur. It's a good chance that you need to appreciate the value of surviving. I talk to a lot of business owners when they start out, they're like, I'm going to make $1 million my first year. And I'm like, this person's dead. Because if and when they don't achieve that, they're just going to quit because they don't value survival enough. They're not just appreciating, hey, if you just survive the first year, that's pretty epic for most businesses, especially if it's a really extraordinary business and you've never done it before and you're just starting. So you got to be careful of the mentality that you're programmed with based upon who's taught you and what your network is and what strategies apply to you. Because even if a strategy sounds like it's a really great strategy, or if it really is a great strategy for some people, it may not be a good strategy for you at that point. So survival as a mentality, that actually served me for many, many years in my business. But there's a point where it's got to be beyond survival in order to go to the next level. And it's where you kind of escape survival, so where you can really live. So there are people out there that they've been surviving for many years, and now they just finally want to live. They want to have some time to themselves. They want to make it so they're not just like struggling to get by anymore. Most of this mentality is really about like relief from survival mode, right? But there's a point where it's like, hey, we got to find some balance, and we've got to start to decide that, life is more about just making it to the next day if we're going to go beyond survival. And so really having a strategy where you live, truly fully live, could be exactly what it takes to do that. And then beyond that, we might have an intention or a strategy to, let's call it, thrive. And by the way, is thriving more than just living? Of course it is. I mean, you could live by taking weekends off and not just struggling day to day. But to thrive, that's a whole nother level. That's where you can like do whatever you want to do. That's where you have total choice and freedom. Like this is a whole nother level here, right? So we were talking about my mentality before is like, I got to be real smart. I got to survive. People have to think this certain thing about me, and just forget about thriving. I just got to focus on this. Well, doing that will never get me where I want to go, because I'll always take the strategies that long term will allow me and my business to thrive, and I will give those up. I will delay those or sublimate those so that I could just keep surviving. And by the way, will that feel good for someone with that mentality? I can tell you personally, yes, it will. Like if I just survive, I'm just like pat myself on the back. That's really good. Good job. You survived. Like that's okay. People that are in the thrive mentality, that doesn't feel good for them anymore. Like that's not okay. For them, it's almost like surviving is like they got to be at a whole nother level. I was talking to somebody in my mastermind months ago, and this is when the travel ban just started and COVID hit, and we were kind of all locked down, right? And he was depressed. And I said, why are you depressed? And he said, well, because travel is like my life. His life was all about thriving in his businesses, making it so he didn't have to attend to them. Like he didn't have to just survive. He could just do whatever he wanted because he was an owner that was like absentee owner, right? And then he would go travel all around the world with his wife, right? And it's like, I can't do that now. And so for him, just not being able to travel all around the world and just have fun with all sorts of different people in different situations, the novelty of that was like, it was almost like he was going to die there. That was almost like survival for most people, right? And so this is a very different mentality, and there's different pleasure and pain attributed to a thrive mentality versus just a live mentality versus a survive mentality. Pleasure for survival is just food for today, right? Pleasure for live is take a day off. Pleasure for thrive is like I was talking about, like go anywhere you want with anybody you want. Total choice and freedom, right? Very different goals, very different pleasure and pain mechanisms, very different motivations and priorities. So I was stuck for many years in survival. And when I started making moves to live and making moves to thrive, changed my entire business, change everything, right? Now I still have challenges with this where I'll go back into survival. And so that's why I need my coach my strategy coach, to pull me out of that and remind me, hey, you know, if you just sit here and survive, you're never going to thrive because you're going to be too busy surviving. You're, as they say, tripping over pennies on the way to dollars. So imagine what a difference this would make financially. Now, by the way, again, there are some people that I've talked to and I've worked with, some clients and some students, that they were so in this thrive mentality, they never learned the lessons of survival. And so they never got to thrive because guess what? It's actually not like this. It's almost like survive is the center. And then in order to live, you've got to survive, right? And then lives out a little farther, and then thriving is in this area here, right? So survival is encompassed by thriving. And so if you didn't get this lesson of survival yet, you can't do this. Plenty of students that I've worked with that are just like that. You know, they've been in kind of personal growth for a long time. They're all about thriving, have never learned to survive, at least in some areas. And they don't even want to bother because that's like painful for them. That's like low for them, right? So let's not judge these different mentalities. Let's appreciate where they're useful and where they're limiting, and then work with our clients on that. So if you take this piece and combine it with what we just talked about, like that egocentric, ethnocentric, world or spirit-centric, you could survive just for yourself egocentrically. You could survive for you and your family ethnocentrically, or you could survive for the world, like help the world to survive. You could also be really up for thriving just yourself. Like you just personally want to thrive, but nobody else. Screw everybody else, right? Or you could have this be thriving for you and like your team. Like I want me and my team and my family to thrive. Or you could have the goal for the entire world to thrive, right? Abundance for everyone, right? And depending on how these two different strategies, these two different internal strategies, these two different mindsets combine together as to what level somebody's at and which areas they've also mastered psychologically, that's going to dictate a lot about the impact that they have for themselves, the people around them, their tribe, so to speak, their team and their family, and then finally the world as well. Whether you impact the world is probably going to be much more predicated on your level of spiritual development, right? If you're egocentric, ethnocentric, or world-centric. Your level of how you impact the world, like what the impact is the level that you've aggregated to here: survival, living, or thriving. So imagine how these different mentalities would impact you as a leader, or impact your client as, like, if you're coaching a manager, impact finances, impact health, impact relationships. There's such a multidimensional impact to these areas. I mean, it just never ends. These are the internal strategies, or some examples, just examples of internal strategies that you might end up thinking through and being aware of and working with your clients on as a strategy coach. Anyone can do this. Now, how we do this specifically, you're going to learn if you're in the Strategy Immersion Training, of course. So we're going to get to that starting this next week, when we're about to begin. But these areas are just ideas through which you can actually start to think through how might I work with somebody on not just an external strategy, but where they are inside themselves, like what their focus is, what their mentality is, what their belief systems are, what their priorities are, because all those are wrapped up in these different constructs, these different concepts, if you will. So here's what I'm going to leave you with today. I'm going to give you a little bit of how-to for this. Now, today, of course, really was just about understanding and appreciating why is strategy coaching the killer app for your clients, for your coaching clients. I hope I've explained that. I hope I've been successful in kind of getting through to you that the how-to of things, at least externally, is massively going to impact your client in areas that are critically important to them, and they will be willing to lay down money and time for, if they have any idea what's good for them. And not to mention also the internal strategies, how they will empower or disempower the execution, the prioritization, the organization of various external strategies to produce external results. Not to mention, regardless of what external results your clients get or don't get, the processing and the way of seeing the world in such a way where you have an amazing outlook on life. You have an amazing experience of life. I mean, you don't have to have amazing finances to have a tremendous life. I mean, you could just have beliefs and values and mindsets and mentalities that have you just tickled pink every moment of the day. And then like life is just amazing. It's an amazing adventure for you, right? You could have health that's not great. I mean, there's plenty of examples, like really inspiring people that born with no arms and no legs or have tremendous difficulties health-wise. And yet they are constantly and consistently in a beautiful state of mind, and they are jazzed about their life, and they're an inspiration to others. Not to mention, there are plenty of people who don't have access to the best and greatest relationships, and yet they have amazing lives, and they are ecstatic about their life, ultimately. So even without the perfect external strategies, you have a great internal strategy. Even if you don't like fix all the circumstances of your life could be epic. Your life can be a shining example of what's possible. It could be really extraordinary. And so that's what you can provide as a strategy coach for your clients. You can not only provide access to like the keys of the kingdom for them, but also you can give them and facilitate for them the gift of having the greatest gifts that life can offer now, even without changing their circumstances, because the way they look at things alter, the way they believe alter, what their priorities are alter, their mentality alters, their spirit alters. You alter that, you're going to alter all the externals anyway, probably, but even if you didn't, your life is still extraordinary because you are an extraordinary mindset. And so this coming week, if you're in strategy immersion training, we're going to get to that immediately. So you're going to see how quickly that can change no matter what the circumstances are. But I'm going to give you some couple simple steps for as we walk away today for how you might use this to really make strategy coaching and working with your client and external and internal strategies tremendously and pricelessly valuable for them. So first element, and these are all questions you want to ask yourself or formulate questions around these questions so that you can approach facilitating conversations with your client, okay? So, and these are things that I would ask myself as I'm working with a client. Question number one, what is, I'm just going to call it my client's current strategy? There is always an answer to that question. Always. If they're talking about how depressed they are, I want to know what's their strategy for depression, because I guarantee you they have one. They know how to get depressed. They're very good at it, right? If my client says I'm broke and I'm penniless and I have to make some money, I want to find out what's their financial strategy currently, internal and external. What's their beliefs and values around it? How do they kind of sort the way they work around finances? And then what's their external methodology through which they actually make money currently or don't, right? Okay, they go out midnight, get drunk, get depressed, get up the next morning at noon and do a lousy job at their job. Okay, well, that's a strategy, not a great strategy, but I want to know what the current strategy is. And I want to also know why, like, why do they have that strategy? Like, what's actually at the root of that strategy? What led them to that? Where did they learn that? Because they're using that strategy not because it's the best strategy necessarily. They're using that because they got addicted to it. It's a habit. They get rewarded for it in some other way other than the area where it's not working for them. I want to know what's their strategy and why do they have that strategy? So this is kind of a sub question, if you will. All right, second. Next question I want to ask would be, what is the ideal strategy? What is the ideal strategy? Now, this could be in context, like in the area that my particular client is working in, or it could just be in their life in general, right? There's all sorts of different zoom points that you can bring to that area. You could zoom really narrowly in for just like what they're doing at work that day, communicating with their boss, or you might zoom way out for like just what's the way they generally look at their life, like what their life is about. So I can zoom out like I did with a client about a month ago. We were talking about her time management, and I asked her, well, what is the purpose of life? Like, what's most important in life? It's the most important thing in life. Okay, it's some variation on that question, right? And she stopped and she really thought, and she said, well, it's about this and this and this. And we went in this entirely different tack in that conversation. Why? Because I wanted to understand beyond just these little things, these plates that she's spinning, like, what does she really care about? And then what's her current strategy around what's most important to her? And then we found that as a result of that, we got to what's really important for her. And we actually found that all this time management juggling wasn't really something we even had to spend that much time on. And we still dealt with it, but it shifted the conversation to something that was way more valuable for her as a result. So I zoomed way out with that particular client. Now, sometimes I'll work with a client like I did a couple of months ago, and this gentleman was working on his own productivity, and he was like, I just want to be more productive. And then I zoomed in with him. I asked him, well, what is your workday like right now? And he said, well, I get up whenever I want because, I don't go to the office anymore because of the, what. And so, I'm not really accountable to anybody. And then I don't really get to enjoy the day during the summer where I live. He lives up north, so the summer is like a priceless time to get a little bit of good weather in. And he's like, so I'm losing in all these areas. I don't get to the most of my time. I don't get the most of my day. I'm not really that productive. I mean, just kind of showed that everything that wasn't working for him was the issues were literally inside of this one day that we could talk about. And we figured out there were like 3 little areas that if he just was accountable for getting up at a certain time, for starting work at a certain time, and for being done with work at a certain time, and getting what he needed to get done within that envelope of time, like he would have a whole different life as a result, at least for now. So in that case, I zoomed in on what he was after and what he was doing and what strategies he was currently working with. So you want just understand that asking what's the current strategy and what's the ideal strategy, these could happen in a very wide angle or a very narrow angle as well. And you've got to decide, this is your job as the artist, as the coach, to kind of work with where do you need to be falling with that particular client for that particular session. And so always be thinking under the umbrella of, like, where are we in the wheel of life, and how much do we need to zoom in and out in this particular session, because that could radically change the way that you actually implement these 2 different questions. But I want to know what the ideal strategy is. Like we were talking about relationships a little earlier, and how, like, one of my clients, their strategy for relationship is novelty. It's all about, they're bored, they need a new relationship so they can not be so bored. And so with that individual, I know what their current strategy is. I have to ask, what's the ideal strategy? And this person wants a long-term relationship, right? So immediately it's obvious, to almost anybody, it was actually obvious to her when I brought it up, that to have a long-term relationship where variety is the main goal of relationships, it's not the ideal strategy. Much more ideal strategy would be to focus on something that's much more long-lasting than just novelty in a relationship, right? Now, again, this is an easy one. It's an obvious one. That's why I'm bringing it up here. But suffice to say, you want to know the answer to this question. Now, could I ask myself and come up with an answer? Yes. Could I ask my client and they come up with an answer? Yes. Could we collaborate on that? Yes. Right. So this is not like a Lego set plug and play exactly what you say to your client. This is not a scripted conversation. You get that? Like this is not, I'm not telling you what to do and what to say. I'm just telling you, here's the general approach to what I'm actually analyzing, thinking about, and trying to clarify. And however I do that, that's the artistry that comes out. And that's what we're going to work on throughout Strategy Immersion Training this semester. Exactly what questions, exactly what order, exactly how to diagnose this stuff, very specific elements, especially around internal and frankly, external strategy as well. And then finally, third, once we know these two things, by the way, all I need to answer is this question. There's only one question left. This is one that very few coaches ever even ask. What is the transformational strategy? What is a transformational strategy? Sounds pretty high-minded. But the bottom line is it's very, very simple. Once we know what their current strategy is, and then we also know, and I've agreed with my clients, so we've resolved what the ideal strategy is, right? Like, so we're on the same page when it comes to these two areas. All that's left is to figure out and understand what is the how-to, what is the strategy that gets my client to go from their current strategy to the ideal. Like, I'm going to oversimplify this, but it's like, in fact, I think I got it written out on one of these sheets, but I dare not attempt to go back there. I'll probably rip this flip chart to shreds. You've got the current strategy, that's like point A. You've got the ideal strategy, that's point B. This is where your client's at, right here. This is where they need to be. Now, by the way, this isn't their goal. This isn't their goal. This is just the strategy they need to execute and they need to take on. They need to transform over to. So their goal is even possible. Their goal is not even possible if they can't get to point B. This isn't them achieving their goal. This is just them shifting how they're thinking or shifting what strategy they're using. That's it. This is the ideal strategy. Do you immediately get your goal as soon as you start using the ideal strategy? Yes or no? Of course not. Right? Like the first day Michael Jordan showed up to practice, at 5 a.m. and really worked the way he needed to, like in high school or college or whenever it was, that was not the first day that he actually made the team or won the playoffs. It was decades later or years later at least, right? So this is just the ideal strategy that we need to get them to. Here's the problem. If all you're doing as a coach is clarifying where they are, where your client is, and clarifying where they need to be strategically, this is under the umbrella of strategy. If that's all you're doing, your client's going to lose, usually. Why? Number one, sometimes a lot of times your clients already know where they need to be strategically. Like you didn't really help them there. Okay. Now, many clients are not clear about even where they are. So this is still helpful for them to at least have awareness. This is all awareness. Like this is where I should be. This is where I am. But if your client doesn't actually traverse the crooked road of transforming their own internal and external strategies from current strategy to the ideal, internal and external strategy, then they'll never get there. And if they never get there, they're never going to reach the goal. Just forget about that. If you don't get this, you don't get that. You get nothing. So that's what that third question is about. I want to know, what is this path? By the way, I'm not just talking about like externally what steps do they need to take. I'm talking about what conversations do we need to have? What processes do I need to lead them through? What questions do I need to ask? What mentality do they need to go through in order to ultimately reach the ideal strategy? And that may take more than just one session to get them there. That might take a lot of sessions. But I can take them on that journey if I have an idea of what this path looks like. I have an idea of what the transformational strategy looks like. So there's 3 strategies. This is strategy number 1, current strategy. Second strategy, really in order that they're going to actually occur in, is the transformational strategy. The strategy of how you're going to help your client go from strategy A to strategy B. And then third, obviously, there's the ideal strategy. That's where you want them. So what's their current strategy? What's the ideal strategy? And then what's the transformational strategy? If you can ask and explore those questions through conversation with your client, thinking about what's going on and thinking about what the answers are, like let's say in between sessions, and coming up with the answers to those, and also facilitating your client being aware of those answers and dancing with the client so that that can actually happen, and then actually implementing and working with them on actually going through this journey towards the ideal strategy, you are priceless for your client. And so follow through on that. Look at this week, especially if you're in strategy immersion training. Think about, as you're having sessions with your client, whether or not you actually get to like major transformational work this week, which you may or may not. I mean, ideally you do, because you're going to get scored on it anyway. Ask, like, what's my client's current strategy? What's their life strategy, their financial strategy, their relationship strategy? Like, you'll start to notice how they do what they do, how they get their needs met, how they get themselves depressed or happy, how they get themselves into action. You'll see what they're going through, the conversations, the frameworks, thought processes, internal and external activity. And then think about, what's the ideal strategy for them? Knowing what they want, knowing what their goals are, knowing what their issues are, challenges are, circumstances, etc. And then what strategies might I use, or might they use, to actually transform their strategy from where they currently are, and their current strategy that may or may not be working as well as they'd like, to the ideal strategy that would get them the most extraordinary life or business or finances or relationship possible. If you do that this week, I know you're going to be effective in your sessions. Now, you may not use the perfect method, okay? You got the rest of your life to figure that out, right? But at least you're looking in the right places. A lot of coaches aren't even looking in those places. So that said, I don't see anything new in the chat. If you do have any questions, feel free to chat me up either now or when we're done with the live stream. And I look forward to talking to you in week 1. If you're in immersion training, follow through on the homework, listen to the CDs. You got to go through those before we're on the training session that's happening very soon. I believe it's tomorrow, depending on which immersion training you're in. And get ready for a magical journey through working with your clients, not just on these general areas, but in the actual mechanics to how to cause these things to happen faster than you might ever imagine. Look forward to talking to you then. Take care, guys.